So I'm pretty excited to talk to you guys today about a scenario called the Night Season. And I'm pretty sure this is my favorite scenario of Call of Cthulhu that I've ever played, and that's saying quite a bit. It's a little bit different and it involves elements of Lovecraft lore that I really love. This is written by Jeff Muller and is a part of a packet of scenarios called The Things We Leave Behind. It's originally intended to be a modern scenario, but can be adjusted in certain ways to make it in a different timeline if necessary. This takes place in Anchorage, Alaska. And about 13 years ago, a teenager named Robert actually was found dead in his room with a blade stuck in his stomach. It was ultimately ruled a suicide, but his parents weren't really happy or satisfied with that conclusion. They end up hiring investigators to do a little bit more work and to figure out what really went on. Now, from this point forward, there will be spoilers. This is going to be some details and tips to the keepers about how to run this scenario. So if you're a player, please send this video on to your keeper. But if you are a keeper, stay tuned for my top tips on how to run the scenario. Okay, keepers. So the first thing that I want to call out is I actually made a change to the timeline that this scenario laid out. Originally, the suicide took place about 13 years ago, but for me, that just added complexity that wasn't necessary. So what I ended up doing is saying that the suicide happened more recently, probably about a couple months ago, and Shelley is a teenager instead of about 30, which is what they have in this scenario. This made it a lot more simple for me as a keeper to plan and have clues and connections, and it was a lot easier for my players to follow as well. So some of the tips that you'll hear is through the context and lens of Shelley being a teenager and the suicide being a lot more recent. The main NPC in this scenario is actually Shelley. And Shelley's mom had a proclivity to addiction. So when she was pregnant with Shelley, she did marijuana, alcohol, and also what's called moon wine. And moon wine is something that allows you to be accessible to the dreamlands. As a result, Shelley was actually born with some brain damage. She's immature, she has a lack of social skills, she's very self-absorbed, and it's sometimes hard for her to function and interact in the waking world. But since Shelley's mom did have some moon wine when she was pregnant, Shelley is what's considered a dreamer, which means she has access to the Dreamlands. For those of you who may not know, the Dreamlands is a vast alternative dimension that was created by Lovecraft. The Dreamlands are accessible via dreams. So there are some people in the waking world that are able to access the Dreamlands. It's a very special trait that some people have. Now, on the initial view, the Dreamlands look pretty similar to our reality that we would know, but there are certain species and certain things that are different and only exist within the Dreamlands. Now, I would recommend, if you're interested in learning a little bit more or want more inspiration on what the Dreamlands are, to read the story written by H.P. Lovecraft called The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. That will give you a little bit more context and also how to visualize what the Dreamlands are. So we know that Shelley sometimes struggles in the waking world. However, in the Dreamlands, she is a very powerful queen. She has intelligence of 90 and she is very powerful and influential. Everyone knows who she is, and her name is Queen Gates of the City. So one of the really cool aspects of this scenario is being able to play that dichotomy of how she interacts in the real waking world and how she interacts in the Dreamlands. It's almost like you get to play out her fantasy and the things that she would be longing for in the waking world, and she gets to be that and have that experience in the Dreamlands, which I think is actually really an incredible and awesome thing that is a part of this character's story. Okay, so you might be wondering, how does Shelley relate to Robert's suicide? Well, Robert was not a very nice person, and he took it as a challenge to seduce Shelley when they were teenagers. And so when this happened, she automatically thought that he was a love interest. See, in the waking world, Shelley is very obsessed with a certain sci-fi show. So everything within the context of the waking world is kind of a reflection of this show and how she tries to relate to people. So automatically, Robert becomes her love interest. And when he tries to leave, Shelley doesn't want him to leave. And so she takes it upon herself to imprison his soul in the Dreamlands. Now, Robert still exists in the waking world, but he no longer has his soul and is not able to dream. Eventually, over a couple weeks, he descends into madness and takes his own life. When the investigators first arrive, you're going to go through a normal investigation period in the waking world. This is pretty common, kind of interviews with people who knew Robert, and it eventually would lead to Shelley. But one important note that I want to give to the keepers is to make sure you write down who they talk to before they meet Shelley and how you describe them to the players. Because after they meet with her, they're going to see shifts in reality as Shelley is slowly transforming this location or city that they're in into her sci-fi world and what she envisions her world being. So the investigators are actually going to start making sanity checks when they see people that they met before that are slowly shifting and looking different. So I had a ton of fun with taking this city, this location, and really changing the players and warping it and seeing different locations kind of change as the players continue to investigate. When they first meet with Shelley, it's probably going to be a little bit difficult to actually influence her mom to let them see her. Particularly in my version, she's a teenager and there's probably, I don't know, anywhere from 3 to 5 older men, women looking to investigate her. It's kind of awkward and weird. And so my players actually were creepy and went around the back of the house and was looking through Shelley's window. Now, because Shelley sees everything through the lens of a sci-fi TV show, she thought that those were her guards. And it was a really fun interaction to play with, and my players did a great job of kind of playing off of what I was doing. And Shelley really influenced them to stay watch and make sure that they were being a guard to her bedroom. So that was a ton of fun to play, and it actually was pretty easy for me to then get my players into the Dreamlands, which is one of the most important parts of this scenario and one of the most fun. So my big tip, because not every player is going to be around when Shelley is sleeping, which is when she in theory has the ability to take people into the Dreamlands, is maybe come up with some alternatives. If they're not around Shelley all the time, then maybe while they're sleeping, they have an opportunity to be sucked into the Dreamlands. Now, when your players get to the Dreamlands, in normal lore, it's more of like a medieval feely type thing in the different cities, but you can make it whatever you want. They actually recommend in this scenario to make it more sci-fi themed so that it is carrying through what Shelley has in the waking world to the Dreamlands. It's really up to you on what you think your players would enjoy most. I personally think that it's fine either way. They call out specific key points in the Dreamlands in the scenario, like the 700 steps, the enchanted forest, which has one of my favorite Lovecraft creatures, Zoogs. And now I probably shouldn't like them because they're the arch enemy of cats, but I just think they're really adorable. So I do enjoy them quite a bit and had fun with trying to trick my players into doing different things in the Enchanted Forest and having them get lost a little bit. And then there's also the Black Galley, which is what transported my characters from the Enchanted Forest to the city, which is the main part of the scenario and where Queen Gates currently is residing. Now, me personally, I feel like I wish I would have expanded the Dreamlands a little bit more because I was having a ton of fun and my players also seem to have a ton of fun in the Dreamlands. And so my big tip for keepers is to have a list of different locations in the Dreamlands and do a little bit of pre-planning and brainstorming on things that could happen in these areas so that your players can explore a little bit more. It'll make the scenario a bit longer, probably 2 sessions, and maybe up to 3 depending on how long they take. But it really makes for a super fun environment and exploration and story. Now, eventually they're going to get back on track and head towards the city where Queen Gates is. Me personally, I had something kind of fun happen. As my players walked through the gates of the city, they actually transformed their looks into sci-fi characters. So I did not bother with changing any of their stats. That would be too messy and complicated, and I felt like that would kind of take away from what they thought their character was. But I did have their looks completely change, and so they were able to roll sanity, and one of them kind of went a little crazy, had a bout of madness, and that was quite fun to play as well. Now within the city, the scenario does not flesh out the city very much, so I'd also spend a little bit of pre-planning thinking about what the city would look like. I personally had a marketplace there that they interacted with different people and kind of investigated a bit, heard all of the great stories of Queen Gates and her great power and justice that she brought to the city, kind of giving a little bit more lore and leading up to the point where they would actually meet with her in the city. Now, they would actually stumble upon Robert, most likely as well. Robert's soul is still within the Dreamlands, and he is trying to make a plan to escape. So there would be several different cases in which the PCs would be able to escape, either through Robert, through being nice to Shelley. If they were nice to her in the waking world, she might just grant them to leave, or a power versus power roll against Shelley. But ultimately, after all the fun time in the Dreamlands, the players are going to be left with a very hard decision. And that is, what do you do with Shelley? She is a harm to other people, as we've seen with her influencing Robert's suicide. And she's also transforming the waking world into something that's more sci-fi and something that it's not. It's warping the reality where she's living. So do you kill her, or do you take her to a mental facility where they can take care of her, but she might wreak havoc there too? Your players should feel uncomfortable when they're making this decision. They've come to know Shelley both in the waking world and the Dreamlands, and hopefully have some empathy for her and her situation. So it's a really tough decision, and hopefully your players are wrestling with that a bit. But at the end of the day, Shelley will be taken care of some way, and they're able to move on to the next one-shot scenario. So overall, I thought this scenario was fantastic. It was pretty unique. It was a ton of fun. It used the Dreamlands, which is probably my favorite Lovecraft aspect and element. So I had a ton of fun with it, and hopefully you guys do too. I thought the scenario was very well written, and there was a ton of detail, so you're able to really pull on that and have inspiration for as your players go through both the Waking World and Dreamlands. Now, to review a couple changes that I made a change to the timeline to make her a bit younger and have the suicide be pretty recent. I also would recommend you writing notes as you're doing investigations to make sure that the city is shifting reality around them in the waking world. Do a little bit of pre-planning for the Dreamlands and make sure that you have that fleshed out and at least have some notes on locations that your players can explore, since I think that would be a ton of fun for everyone. And at the end of the day, your players will probably have to wrestle with a tough decision. But I hope this helps to give you some clarity on what to look out for in this scenario. And if you do end up running it, please let me know in the comments below how it went, or if you have any tips on how to better run this scenario. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more Call of Cthulhu content. Thank you. Bye.